All right, we've done the updates, what's out there. Now, let's get the security news because there's some big stuff going on.
Yeah, probably the most alarming story broke very recently relative to our recording of the podcast, and that was the news, which unfortunately was overwrought, I would say is probably the right term, and also blaming the wrong person, in my opinion. The news was originally posted by Gawker.
Not known for its security coverage.
No. And their headline, even now, after it's clear that this is not the case, says that it's a huge breach in Apple's iPad security, naming Apple as like the focus of this. So here's the story. A group of researchers at a company called Goatse Security, security.goatse.fr, they discovered the protocol which AT&T was using to fill in the email address field for the login to their system on the iPad. So the idea would be an iPad user who wanted to check on their AT&T account status would bring up the control panel in the iPad, and the email address is one of the two authentication fields which you fill in. So what the iPad was doing was it was sending what's known as the the ICC-ID to AT&T. That stands for Integrated Circuit Card Identifier, which is part of the SIM, the standard SIM card. SIM stands for Subscriber Identity Module. So that's part of the standard data in the SIM card is this ICC-ID. So that was going on the fly to AT&T's servers and essentially making a standard web request, an HTTP request from the iPad to AT&T's servers database. The servers were then responding with the email address of the user, so that it could
in the clear,
so that it could populate that field, which made it was a convenience feature, which made it easier for then the user to just all they had to then provide was their password, that matched their account name. The account name being this email address that they had used. So the bad news is that there was no security protecting this. This was an in-the-clear standard HTTP query and response, like we've talked about on the show endlessly. So the Goatse guys realized that anyone could make such a query of AT&T's back-end database of subscribers' email addresses using made-up ICC-IDs. The ICC-ID is a fixed format, international standard, part of GSM, which goes along with the SIM cards. It's 20 digits long, the 20th digit being a check digit. So it's sort of a checksum for the 19 which precede. The 19 digits are fixed fields, sort of like a MAC address, of known fields, like, for example, the carrier's identity and other stuff. And then there's a chunk of digits at the end, which is like a serial number. So many excited iPad owners were taking screenshots of this panel of theirs, because this you can see, you bring up sort of like in the about dialogue on an iPad, and it shows you your ICC-ID, which is this 20-digit number. So there were, many people were sharing this without any concern on the net. And frankly, any iPad owner could easily look at it. So what the hackers did cleverly was they reverse engineered the protocol, which was trivial, because you only had to, in the user agent field, you had to pretend to be an iPad. So you use the iPad's user agent to make it look like an iPad was making the query to AT&T's servers. And then they just set up a PHP script to try all possible ICC-IDs within the range that were known to be iPads, because they're sequential, unfortunately. So they started like at ICC-IDs close to those that had been shown publicly, and they just had their script try them all. And what was embarrassing to AT&T and a great concern to many people is they collected 114,000 email addresses.
Wow.
Like many, like .gov and army.mil and apparently, A-list celebrities and all kinds of government officials who were, when you see their email address, you know who it is.
Right.
Because,
like Rahm Emanuel, chief of staff.
In the White House, exactly. White House, yeah. And so the news that broke was that this was of course, unfortunately, Apple was dragged into this because they made the iPad, although this was entirely AT&T's fumbling of not protecting the email addresses of their 3G customers better. It would have been certainly possible. I mean, I would argue, unfortunately, that it's probably not ultimately protectable, because, as we know, if the iPad could generate a query, then it's possible, no matter what, to reverse the iPad's generation of the query and pretend to be an iPad. So it's not. I mean, but AT&T could have made it so much more difficult, could have raised the bar so much that it would have never been a problem.
Well, they could have hashed it or something. I guess they can't, though, because the software...
They would have had to encrypt it, right, because they couldn't hash it because they want to show you what your email address is. So they would have had to have done reversible encryption in order... So it would have had,
that capability would have had to been built into the software.
Precisely. And if the software were reverse engineered, somebody could, issue their own. They could just, arranged to like change the ICC-ID and have the iPad do it. So the bar couldn't have been raised all the way up, but it could have been so much higher that, well, I'm sure that these guys were doing some packet sniffing and they saw the data in the clear.
Right.
And as they said, hey, wait a minute. But if instead it had just been scrambled, they would have never occurred to them what was going on. So yes, AT&T blundered by not protecting this data more strongly. And,
now, what did they get, though? They only got an email address.
Yes.
How? Well, let me ask you a question. I mean, look, I just showed my ICC-ID. Now, this, by the way, was patched by AT&T, fixed on Tuesday.
Prior to the release of the news. Yeah. So there was some responsible disclosure done so that prior to the release, AT&T was allowed to fix it so that it wouldn't still exist.
And Goatse, by the way, tried to give this story to a lot of mainstream media, all of which ignored it. Probably because of the name Goatse Security. I would have ignored it. It sounds like a 4chan prank. But how bad is it really if they got... I mean, I showed my ICC-ID. Even if that hack still was out there, people would then have my email address, which is available publicly in many, many places. How bad is it that your email address gets out?
Well, I'm thinking that's for everyone to judge.
Right.
Probably the concern
That's all they got, right, is email addresses.
That's all they got. They got the email address that was used for the 3G account. I made up an email address for the purpose. There's some... I didn't use my real email address just because that's who I am. But so people have oftentimes multiple email addresses. They may have scratch ones or discardable ones or who knows what. So the concern is, yes, I mean, I guess I would say it's controversial. You could decide it's a big thing. You could decide it's not a big thing. But you're right, Leo. All they got was a large database of early adopters of iPads' email addresses.